Good evening. Welcome to Part 9 of our Middle-earth series. This is the fourth story in the Elven Sanctuaries, the Sage of Starhaven. Let's begin. The forest grew quiet as the companions emerged from the labyrinth, their footsteps muffled against the mossy ground. The air was heavy with an ancient stillness, the kind that carried the weight of unspoken truths and untold histories. Orlen glanced at the others, their faces pale and worn from the trials within the labyrinth. Sirana's eyes scanned the horizon, her hand resting lightly on the hilt of her blade, while Adric leaned against his staff, his breaths shallow but steady. Cullen lingered behind, his gaze distant, as though the shadows of the labyrinth still clung to him. The forest around them seemed alive, its trees towering and twisted, their canopies intertwining to block out much of the light. Despite the quiet, Orlen could feel a faint hum in the air, a resonance that reminded him of the labyrinth's rhythm, though softer and more inviting. It was Sirana who spoke first, her voice breaking the stillness like a blade through silence. "We need answers," she said, her tone measured but resolute. "The labyrinth revealed much, but it left us with more questions than clarity." Adric nodded, though his expression was pensive. "The relics are connected to something far older than the keepers themselves," he said, his voice low. "The visions we saw, they point to a purpose we don't yet understand. We can't continue blindly." It was then that Cullen, who had been silent for much of the journey, lifted his head, his voice quiet but firm. "Starhaven," he said, the word carrying an unexpected weight. Orlen frowned, the name unfamiliar to him. "What's Starhaven?" he asked. Calen glanced at him, his pale features softening slightly. "An Elven Sanctuary," he explained. "One of the oldest. It's said to be a place of knowledge and prophecy, where even the wisest come to seek counsel." Sirana turned sharply to Cullen, her eyes narrowing. "And how do you know of such a place?" she asked, her tone edged with suspicion. Cullen hesitated, his gaze flickering to the ground. "My family once spoke of it," he admitted. "When I was young, there were stories, whispers, really, about a figure called the Sage of Starhaven, a guardian of wisdom, said to have lived through the ages of the keepers. If anyone knows the truth about these relics, it's him." Sirana studied him for a moment longer before nodding curtly. "Then that's where we go," she said. "We don't have time to question every lead. If this sage exists, he may be our only chance at understanding what we're carrying and what's chasing us." The journey to Starhaven was slow and arduous, the forest thickening around them with each passing mile. The path was little more than a faint trail winding through the underbrush, its twists and turns obscured by roots and tangled vines. Orlen felt the weight of the ring in his pocket grow heavier as they walked, its pulse steady but insistent, as though urging him onward. The others moved in silence, their weariness palpable but their determination unshaken. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches forming arches overhead that filtered the light into soft, shifting patterns on the ground. It was Adric who finally broke the silence, his staff tapping rhythmically against the stones as he walked. "If this sage is as old as the stories say, he may not take kindly to unexpected visitors," he said, his tone thoughtful. "The elves are not known for their openness." Sirana gave a faint smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "We'll deal with that when we get there," she replied. "For now, we focus on finding Starhaven." Calen led the way, his movements more confident than Orlen expected, as though he could sense the path even when it was invisible to the others. Hours passed, the forest growing denser and the air cooler, until they came upon a clearing that took Orlen's breath away. In its center stood an ancient tree, its trunk massive and gnarled, its branches spreading wide and heavy with leaves that shimmered faintly in the dim light. At its base was an archway carved into the tree itself, its surface etched with glowing runes that pulsed softly, almost like a heartbeat. "This is it," Cullen said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The entrance to Starhaven." Orlen stepped closer, his heart pounding as he took in the intricate carvings on the archway. The runes were unlike any he had seen before, their patterns flowing like water and shifting subtly as he watched. Sirana approached cautiously, her hand brushing the hilt of her blade, while Adric studied the runes with quiet fascination. "This is elven magic at its finest," Adric murmured. "Older than anything we've encountered so far. It's alive." Kalen stepped forward and placed a hand on the archway, his fingers tracing the runes. The air grew warmer, and the runes flared briefly before dimming again, as though recognizing his presence. A soft light began to emanate from the archway, and a voice deep and melodic echoed from within. "Travelers, you stand at the threshold of Starhaven, a sanctuary of wisdom and light. Speak your purpose, and the path shall be revealed." Sirana stepped forward, her tone steady as she replied. "We seek the Sage of Starhaven," she said. "We carry relics tied to the keepers, and we seek their truth." The voice was silent for a moment, and Orlen felt a chill run down his spine as the runes shifted again, their glow deepening to a warm gold. "Enter, if your hearts are true," the voice said at last. "But know that the wisdom you seek comes at a price." The light from the archway brightened, and the air around them seemed to shimmer. Orlen exchanged a glance with Sirana, who nodded silently before stepping through the archway. One by one, the others followed, the light enveloping them as they passed into the sanctuary. Orlen hesitated for a moment, his hand brushing the ring in his pocket, before taking a deep breath and stepping forward. The light was warm and soft, and as it surrounded him, he felt a sense of amour wash over him, as though the forest itself was welcoming him. When the light faded, he found himself standing in a vast, open chamber filled with the soft glow of starlight, and at its center stood a figure cloaked in silver, their presence radiant and unearthly, Al. The chamber was vast and luminous, its walls carved from living wood that shimmered faintly in the soft glow of unseen starlight. High above, the ceiling opened to the night sky where countless stars shone in intricate constellations that seemed to shift and dance. The air was cool and carried a faint, fragrant scent of blooming flowers, though no garden could be seen. In the center of the chamber stood a figure cloaked in flowing silver robes, their presence both commanding and serene. They were tall, even for an elf, and their long white hair fell in soft waves around a face that seemed untouched by time. Their eyes, bright and piercing, reflected the light of the stars, and when they spoke, their voice was like music woven into words. "You carry burdens heavier than you know," the sage said, their gaze sweeping over the companions. "And you seek truths that will demand much of you." Sirana stepped forward, her blade sheathed but her stance firm, her voice steady despite the awe in her eyes. "We seek understanding," she said. "The relics we bear are tied to the keepers, but their purpose remains hidden. If we are to carry them, we must know what they mean." The sage inclined their head, their expression unreadable. "The relics chose you," they replied. "That alone speaks of your worth. But the truth you seek lies not in the relics themselves, but in the choices you make because of them. They turned to Orlen, their gaze resting on him for a moment longer than the others. The ring you carry, the sage said, their voice soft but resonant, is more than a token of the past. It is a key, one that can unlock paths long forgotten, but keys can open many doors, not all of them meant to be walked through. Orlen's hand instinctively went to the ring in his pocket, its warmth a familiar reassurance. "What does it unlock?" he asked, his voice quiet but filled with urgency. The sage smiled faintly, a gesture that carried both kindness and sadness. "That is not for me to tell," they said. "The relics speak to their bearers in their own time. But know this, the keepers created them not as weapons, but as guides. They are fragments of a greater whole, a tapestry of light and shadow that stretches across the ages." Adric stepped closer, his staff glowing faintly as he regarded the sage with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "If they are guides, then where do they lead?" he asked. The sage's gaze turned skyward, their eyes reflecting the shifting constellations above. "To a truth that lies at the edge of the world," they said. "A truth that has waited for its time to be revealed." The chamber grew quieter, the air heavy with the weight of the sage's words. Kalen, who had been standing silently at the back of the group, spoke at last, his voice low and hesitant. "And what of the shadows that follow us?" he asked. "Do they seek the same truth?" The sage's expression darkened, their piercing eyes narrowing slightly. "The shadows seek only to unmake," they said. "They are echoes of a broken past, bound by hatred and fear. They cannot wield the relics, but they can destroy what they cannot possess. That is their purpose, and it will not change." The companions exchanged uneasy glances, the gravity of the sage's words settling heavily upon them. Sirana straightened, her voice firm as she asked, "Then how do we stop them? If the relics are to guide us, how do we ensure they don't fall into the wrong hands?" The sage turned their full attention to her, their gaze unwavering. "The relics chose you because they saw in you the strength to carry them," they said. "But strength alone is not enough. You must understand the relics, not as tools, but as a reflection of yourselves. Only then can you wield their true power." They gestured to the chamber's far wall, where a large, ornate mirror hung, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly light. "Step forward," the sage said. "Look into the mirror of stars. It will show you what you must see." The companions hesitated, their gazes shifting uneasily toward the mirror. Sirana was the first to move, her steps measured as she approached the glowing surface. The light of the mirror flared as she stood before it, and her reflection rippled and shifted, revealing a scene of battle. A younger Sirana, her blade raised against a shadowy foe, her expression fierce but pained. The image faded, replaced by another. Sirana standing alone in a vast, empty field, the weight of her blade dragging her to her knees. She turned away abruptly, her face set in a mask of determination, but Orlen could see the tension in her shoulders. Adric stepped forward next, his staff glowing brighter as he faced the mirror. His reflection shimmered, revealing a vast library filled with endless rows of ancient tomes, each one glowing faintly with magic. Adric reached for one of the books, but as his hand touched its cover, the light dimmed, and the shelves began to collapse around him. He stepped back from the mirror, his expression unreadable, though his grip on his staff tightened. Kylan approached last, his movements slow and reluctant. The mirror's light dimmed as he stood before it, revealing a single image, Kaelin alone in a dark, twisting corridor, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. He turned to Orlen as though seeking help, but no one came. Kaelin stepped back quickly, his breath shallow as he avoided meeting anyone's gaze. Orlen hesitated, his heart pounding as he stepped toward the mirror. The light flared once more, and his reflection rippled, revealing a field of stars stretching endlessly into the void. In the center of the field stood a single figure, shrouded in shadow, its form indistinct but unmistakably familiar. The figure turned toward him, its glowing eyes locking with his own, and Orlen felt a chill run through him as the reflection dissolved into darkness. The mirror's light faded, and the chamber was silent once more. The sage regarded them all with a calm yet penetrating gaze. "The mirror reveals not the future, but the truth of your hearts," they said. "You must carry these truths with you as you walk your path. Only then can you wield the relics as they were meant to be." They stepped forward, their silver robes shimmering in the soft starlight. "Your journey is far from over," they said, "but you leave Starhaven with the knowledge you need to face what lies ahead. Trust in yourselves and in each other." The chamber's light dimmed slightly as the companions stood in silence, the sage's words lingering like echoes in the cool air. Orlen's heart was heavy, the vision from the mirror of stars etched into his mind. The shadowed figure he had seen felt closer now, its presence unsettling and inescapable, but he knew they couldn't remain in Starhaven forever. Serana stepped forward, her voice steady but quiet. "You've shown us much," she said, addressing the sage, "but we still don't know where the relics are leading us. If they're meant to guide, we need to understand their path." The sage's gaze shifted upward, their piercing eyes reflecting the starlight above. "The relics will lead you to the final sanctuary of the Keepers," they said, "but the path is veiled in shadow, and only those who can endure the trials of the sanctuaries will uncover its truth." They gestured toward a carved doorway at the far end of the chamber, its edges lined with glowing runes. "Beyond this threshold lies the path you must take. It will lead you through the remnants of the sanctuaries, where the Keeper's wisdom and their warnings still linger. Follow it with care, for not all who walk it reach its end." The companions exchanged uncertain glances, the weight of the sage's words pressing heavily upon them. Adric tapped his staff softly against the ground, the faint glow at its tip pulsing rhythmically. "If this path takes us to the truth," he said, "then we'll walk it. But the Keeper's sanctuaries are ancient. How can we trust that their wisdom hasn't been corrupted over time?" The sage turned to him, their expression unreadable but calm. "Wisdom does not corrupt, but those who seek to twist it do," they replied. "The shadows that follow you will attempt to poison what you learn. It is your task to discern truth from lies and hold to your purpose." Their gaze moved to Kaelin, whose pale face betrayed his unease. "And you," they said gently, "must decide whether you are ready to face your fears or let them guide your steps. Fear is a powerful master, but it is an even greater teacher when confronted." Kaelin's eyes widened, but he said nothing, his hands clenched tightly at his sides. The sage stepped closer to Orlen, their presence radiating warmth and stillness. "You carry the burden of leadership, though you do not yet realize it," they said softly. "The ring you hold is not merely a key, but a symbol of unity, one that binds your group together. Its warmth is not just its power, but yours, a reflection of your ability to draw strength from those around you and to offer it in return." Orlen swallowed hard, the ring in his pocket suddenly feeling heavier than ever. I'm just trying to understand all of this, he said quietly. I didn't ask for this role. The sage's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. Few do, they replied. But the relic chose you for a reason, and in time, you will understand. Sirana moved to stand beside Orlen, her blade still sheathed but her presence commanding as always. Then we follow the path, she said firmly. We've come too far to turn back now. The sage nodded, their silver robes catching the faint glow of the runes as they moved toward the carved doorway. They traced a hand along its edges, and the runes flared brightly, the air shimmering as the door began to open. Beyond it lay a winding path through the forest, its edges lined with glowing stones that pulsed faintly in rhythm with the relics. This path will take you to the next sanctuary, the sage said. Follow it with resolve and trust in each other. The shadows will test your bonds, but they cannot break what is truly strong. The companions stepped forward, the light from the open doorway casting long shadows behind them as they prepared to leave. The sage watched them in silence, their presence both comforting and distant, like a star that guided from afar but could not walk the path alongside them. Orlen paused at the threshold, glancing back at the sage. Will we meet again? He asked. The sage tilted their head slightly, their expression serene. Perhaps, they said. But Starhaven is not where your journey ends. Seek the sanctuaries, and you may find more than you expect. As the group stepped onto the forest path, the doorway behind them closed, the runes fading into the wood as though they had never been there. The air outside was cool and fresh, the faint rustle of leaves and the distant call of nightbirds filling the silence left by the sage's parting words. The glowing stones along the path cast a soft, steady light, guiding their way through the dense forest. Sirana led the way, her movements deliberate and purposeful, while Adric followed close behind, his staff raised like a beacon. Orlen walked beside Calen, who remained quiet but no longer avoided his gaze. The weight of the ring in Orlen's pocket felt different now, not heavier but more defined, as though its purpose had shifted with their steps. The path twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the forest, and Orlen couldn't help but glance back once more, though the entrance to Starhaven was already lost to the trees. The sage's words echoed in his mind, their weight both reassuring and daunting. The sanctuaries will test us, he said aloud, more to himself than to the others. Tirana glanced back at him briefly, her eyes sharp but not unkind. Then we'll face those tests, she said simply. Together. Orlen nodded, his steps growing steadier as they followed the glowing stones into the night, the faint hum of the forest guiding them toward whatever lay ahead.